Alrighty, folks, welcome back. Welcome back. Thank you, Tomas. Thank you, Coach Brunty and Patrick, for your wonderful panel this afternoon, continuing to draw some parallels between the world of athletics, cybersecurity competitions, and esports. And folks, with that, it is my pleasure to move us on to our final guest speaker of the Season 4 US Cyber Open kickoff celebration. Our closing keynote is with the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer from NIST, Mr. Blair Heiserman. Blair, whenever you're ready, welcome to the stage.
All right. So thank you to the sponsors, and quite frankly, thank you to all the participants. You're doing one of my favorite activities in the world, and quite frankly, one of the things that had helped me to get to where I am in my career. I'm currently the NIST CISO. I'm also the director of the IT Security and Networking Division. So we handle all of the networks, perimeters, firewalls, the telecom group, assessment and authorization. For people that don't know what that is, that's also governance, risk, and compliance. And I've been doing this for 25 years, well, more than, but I love IT. I love cyber. I love the challenges that come with it. It's a career that, quite frankly, I recommend to everyone who has the opportunity to get into it, in part because every day is constant change. That, to me, is a bonus. You will never be bored. Every new project, ultimately, be it a firestorm that is coming out of nowhere to get you to respond immediately, like an incident, or something where you're trying to do a new system modernization or integration. Each of these things has complex challenges to pull together. Now, it's sort of jumping way ahead to the future of where you can go with a career. And ultimately, that's something that has been built for me piece by piece. Subject matter expertise is something that you build one day at a time. It's something that comes from a project that you're given, from getting into a particular component of an operating system, an application, writing a program, following a particular interest that you've got. I see this as sort of this extension of the different pieces of what I've worked on. So I started as a simple system administrator. And I got into that because when I was in second grade, I built my mother's computer because I thought it was cool. And she was very annoyed when she got home, and her first computer that she had ever purchased, I had already put together and was playing games on. So my interest in how things work, how to put them together, how they work with each individual piece has been lifelong. And that's something that I know that can be discovered. And the piece of all of this that comes together just sort of as inspiration, and I think all of the previous speakers have talked about it, is constant learning, of curiosity, persistence in following things down to the individual element of what's going on. And that becomes sort of a running theme. As part of my job, I have previously been an administrator for 10,000 plus endpoints. If you can do something on one computer, you can do it on 10,000. You can do it on 50,000. And let me tell you, it's really nerve-wracking when you do something wrong on 10,000 individual systems, because the phone calls that come from that are, quite frankly, somewhat horrifying. So that gets you into all the other pieces of IT and cyber, of making certain that you've appropriately tested and planned for the things that you do. And that is sort of this continuation of, part of what I've been thinking about and talking to all of you is, how did I get here? And I say that sort of from a imposter syndrome thing. I am actually an introvert, but in my work life, you wouldn't know that. I actually have no problems going up to people of all levels in organizations and talking to them about IT, the problems that they're experiencing, and how to solve them. But in my personal life, that's not quite as easy a thing. And so, again, some of how you get forward in your career comes from things like the subject matter expertise that you build, from learning about, starting very simply, install Linux on an old system, figure out how it works. When it doesn't go right, do it again. Failure and trying again, reading the manual. I mean, these are actually constant themes that I hear from people throughout industry, that in fact, the reason people have gotten ahead is because they have read the manual, understood what it was, realized the manual was wrong, went back, and then found out what actually happened with a particular program. And all of that ties in because knowing, having done that work, having followed that thread to the actual solution gets you to the point where you have the confidence to go and talk to someone about the system or the application or the incident. And all of those pieces do then give you what you're looking for in terms of something that is rewarding to you. You have the expertise, you have the confidence, and you can overcome things like being an introvert in every other situation but your work life. And ultimately, that then feeds into things like, I know that some of the other speakers have said, you may get a job from doing things like this. And I can actually say, as a hiring manager, I absolutely hire people for exactly the skills that are taught in these kinds of competitions. I participate in these kinds of competitions. Everyone needs the skills that you are learning by competing in these games. They need it to run stable and secure networks. And everyone needs IT, and everyone needs secure IT. You can't function in the world without that. And I've heard the other speakers talk about things like the very large enterprises, but the reality is your mom and pop store down the street needs IT as well, and they need it to be secure. In some cases, possibly more so than the large enterprises that can afford to purchase big enterprise tools. And ultimately, that is something where I have also very much hired people for their passion, not because of formal degrees, not because of certifications. I have hired some of my very best employees who did not have a high school diploma because they were interested in the topics and they followed them all the way to the end and were willing to do what needed to be done to figure out how to do what was asked of them. Now, being from NIST, I can tell you that NIST is a standards agency. We provide guidance for cybersecurity. And it's certainly a place where I strongly recommend you go to the Computer Security Resource Center, or csrc.nist.gov. There are hundreds of special publications, NIST interagency reports that go into both the research, but also into the specifics of very critical cybersecurity topics. Incident response, how to classify data, mandatory controls for government systems, if you have a certain impact level of data within your environment. So it gives you that catalog of things that you are required to do, the ones that you could do and might provide alternate mitigations. To put it back into more technical language, it's the things that you're going to configure on an individual system to make certain that it is secure and that it stays secure. And that's something that can be learned. And it's something you can learn with one system. With free and open source software, you can have a home lab. You can use a Raspberry Pi. You can use an old computer. You can use an ancient computer. And ultimately, you can do things like install an old version of Linux with critical vulnerabilities. Then have a second computer and exploit that critical vulnerability. Of course, give yourself permission first. I think it's been mentioned, but you have to have written authorization to do vulnerability and penetration testing and stay in scope. Otherwise, you get to talk about things like the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, but that's for malicious actions. But the reality is, if you don't think like an attacker, you don't understand how easy the exploits of some of these vulnerabilities are. These games should be giving you exactly that experience because you will be able to step right in, and when you get root on a system and can pull back any file and recognize how easy it is. And sometimes when you even don't get directly to root, but have to work for it a little more or pivot to another system, each of these experiences show what the attackers are doing. And ultimately, you begin to see what you need. And I've used cybersecurity conferences as my sort of temperature gauge for what is the current threat in the world right now, and how do you protect against that? And are the protections that NIST recommends ones that are appropriate? And I can tell you that, quite frankly, in many cases, much of my career has been built on the fact that I read the NIST special publications on how to secure systems early in my career. And you will find that basics, read the manual for the application, see what it is supposed to do, then actually seeing what it actually does. Each of these steps get you to that further understanding about the environment that you're in, how things interconnect. There are so many different pieces. I mean, in a way, there's not enough time for me to go over all of it, because you can get into operating systems, ports, protocols, software documentation, network packet captures, or you can go the other way. You can go on the policy side. What is the framework of how you're supposed to protect the system? That's usually governed by laws, the NIST special publications, HIPAA. You have all of these different components where you're able to see what you're being told that you're required to do. And then typically, as someone doing IT or cybersecurity, you have to figure that out. And that, again, comes back to having the curiosity to determine how to solve the potentially unknown problem, or the problem with an unknown answer, and making it happen. Sometimes that's coding. Sometimes it's figuring out how to make the different components talk, or take two vendors who don't tend to work well together and make it work anyways. It's this willingness to try, understanding that with software, the worst that can happen in many cases is you simply start over. You uninstall, you rebuild the operating system, and you build it again. You build it, you break it, you fix it. And ultimately, that begins to sort of give you that foundation of knowledge. Now, for me, I ultimately got to where I am by following that same path, from being a system administrator to a security enthusiast, because one of my production systems got compromised. And it got compromised even though it was fully patched. And back then, the order you applied the patches mattered. So it turned out that applying them in a different order meant that you essentially reinstalled a vulnerable DLL, which allowed the takeover of the system. But that experience was critical for me. That failure to properly protect the system ultimately put me on this entire path, so that I end up here where, as an introvert, I'm not entirely certain why I'm making essentially the conversations of security of an enterprise. And yet, ultimately, that is my passion. This is something that I have actually avidly pursued, and can say that it is something that you can very much learn, gain, and provide to the people around you. So very much the comments on having a good team, respecting your team, making certain that you know the skills of your team, knowing that you can't know it all of these build into then taking that and also going to where you want to be in your career. Now, for all of that, I hope that you've had a chance to listen to all of the prior speakers. They've very much had wonderful points on how to build and create your career. Free and open source software gives you a great resource to go and learn. The NIST Computer Security Resource Center also has a lot of publications that, if you read them, you can learn the specifics of all of these different topics. And quite frankly, it will help you build a career and find the niche in IT that works for you. And that is something that can get you to being either on the attacker side, figuring out how to potentially break into an environment so that someone can then protect from those attacks, or on the flip side, being the defender and identifying what is not right, understanding what's different as opposed to what's normal, making certain that someone actually goes and reads the logs so that you can then analyze them and give that information throughout, and raise the awareness of security in the environment, of understanding that, in fact, obsolete operating systems cannot be on a production network. You actually do have to do upgrades and ensure that things are patched and updated. All of this is very much something that you can learn and identify is ultimately good for you and your career. I have to give a small shout out to the SB 853, which is Security and Privacy Controls for Information Systems. If you don't know it, I recommend you look at it. And if you haven't, if you also want to go back and take a holistic look, The Systems Engineering Guide, which I believe is the 800-161, is another great read to think about the system as a whole. And with that, I've apparently consumed my time, so I'll make certain that I leave you with one of my favorite thoughts, which is please go hack the planet, T-shark that PCAP, strings your binaries, solve your challenges, and best of luck in this competition, and hopefully with your upcoming cyber career.